Today's featured guest likens his entrepreneurial journey to a meandering river. Having dabbled in music production, web design, coding, and even a few years as a youth pastor, he has finally settled into his role as team lead and CEO of one great studio. With one great story, let's meet Djuvane Browne. You did music production, you've done, you're a coder at heart, right? Would that be correct?
At a point, yes.
At a point.
But I liked coding. You know,
but how did you get started in the most simple way?
Well, I grew up in a family that was entrepreneurial. So my dad was a musician, so he never had a job really. Well, he was his own boss, right? And so he was a freelance musician at first. He used to play in a band. You know, it was a pretty popular band in the 80s.
What's the
70s.
name of the band?
Bloodfire Posse was the name of the band.
Cool.
I mean, they got signed to international stuff. So he toured for a while and then he started doing production after a while. So he was no longer like a traveling artist, musician type person, but he's a producer. So then he went into producing, and you know, my entire family is actually a music family. So all my uncles, like Cleve is my uncle, my dad was Main Street. So they had like Red Rat, all them guys, that was all my dad's stuff. So, I mean, my family, my uncle played with like Ziggy, you know, Uncle Glenn, Uncle Dalton was with Freddie. So these guys are like all like, you know.
Freddie McGregor?
Yeah.
You're name dropping and you're not adding on the last part.
Yes, Freddie
so
McGregor. But those are all, all my uncles, my dad, and even some of my cousins and my brother, as you know, like they're all like in music. So like I grew up in a music family, which is similar, you know, creative industry kind of thing. And so yeah, that's where I grew up.
So you have been involved in all of these things. A lot of people would think that perhaps you were hired to or a part of or, you know, in an organization that does these kinds of things. But you've never actually worked for another company, a third party. You've never done that. How?
I mean, so I've never really worked. I mean, work for a company. Like, so I've never been like employed in a 9-to-5. But you know, being in a service industry, you still work for people all the time. But I've never been employed to anybody else but myself, right? And so as a freelancer or a solopreneur, like a sole trader for a while, and then now at one great studio, right?
So how did you didn't feel any pressure to take the traditional path? You know, people tell you go to school.
So the good thing is like because we're already one step ahead because I was from a non-traditional family, you know, so my parents were already in non-traditional stuff, so I didn't have the pressure of doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, you know, like I didn't have that pressure. And so coming out of school, it was like, all right, well, what you want to do? It's either music or it's going to be web stuff. So that's really what it was at the time.
When did you get introduced to web stuff, as you call it?
I had a brethren called Kwame Livingston. He used to run this site called Cyberjam. He said, I'm a little older than I look. So this was a long time. Right? It was like it was like probably Jamaica's first like real like online platform that a lot of things are. This is like you know, at the forefront of like broadband. Still dial-up days. You know, like just transitioning into broadband. And so he had a site called Cyberjam. He was a programmer, and I started working with him like designing, doing like web design stuff, like creating stuff for him. And I would just always be like, hey, what you think about this redesign? And then eventually he started using it. And then I went off to school. So we were all in Jamaica for maybe 2 years, just kind of like experimenting with stuff. And then, and so I was just kind of helping him as much as I could, like anything I have, I throw ideas at him. Then I went off to school. At the time, I was playing basketball, right? Because the truth is, my teenage years was basketball and music, right? That's all I did at the time, was basketball and music, whether sound or, because I used to mix. And then I did some production. Dad was a producer, so I started getting into that. He was trying to like bring me into the production type of stuff. So. But when I went to school, my first job ever, my first paying job, I remember it was like my basketball coach, because I was a basketball player. And it's a D3 school, so you couldn't get basketball scholarship. So I was on an academic scholarship and like, you know, playing ball. And like the coach was like, hey, I know this guy was a booster. And he like, you know, he looking for a website. He knew that I was doing like website stuff. So I did my first website for $1,500 US at the time. That was big money at the time, you know, right? It was big money. This was like 2000, right? It was really the year 2000. That's when I went to school. And it was cool because like at that time, like I designed it, chopped it up in Dreamweaver, coded it, and then write the copy, did everything, right?
Wow.
And I started doing like odd jobs like that throughout school for people in Wisconsin. And then I also, eventually I ended up working in like the website department at the school. Okay. Like just doing coding for them on the sports page. So I had to build sports pages for them. So I ended up just building out the sports page with all the features and news articles and stuff. So that's where I really got like most of my experience at the time, is building the school website pages.
So would you say it was at that time you got bitten by the bug?
Yeah, it was, because it was weird because everything else was paying like, you know, $3 per hour. I don't remember what the pay was, but everything else was paying low.
Right.
And this particular like on-campus job was paying a little bit more, because it was like a high-skill job, right? So I could get more doing that than I could like at the front office or the front desk of the gym, which was my other job, right?
So you had multiple jobs.
Yeah, as a student, when you're in school, like remember you have like work opportunities on school, on property, because you can't, as an international student, so you can't work off campus. Right. So I was working on campus, and these were the opportunities I had, was in the sports department at the gym, front, we're just taking people card, swiping it, and letting them in.
Right.
And then that was less pay than working on the website stuff.
It sounds like you have always balanced things. Like it feels like sports team and academics, you know, sports and your IT stuff. I wanted to know, what did you do in school? So you played ball,
yes.
Right? We got that.
Well, the funny thing about that, I stopped after the first semester.
You stopped playing basketball after the first semester? All right, so obviously you are tied to nothing. You are a free spirit.
It's funny because what happened is the same guy who got me that job, right? When it was time for Christmas, I wanted to come home. This is my first semester away,
right?
And I wanted to come home, and he was like, "Well, you know, as a freshman, you're getting like 10 minutes a game, which is good, right? And if you want to go home, you have 3 days." I was like, "Bro, I'm leaving Wisconsin to go to Jamaica. So I'll see you in 2 weeks." So I went back in 2 weeks, and he was like, "All right, well, you know, we have a nice place for you on the bench."
Oh, they cut you from the team?
No, he didn't cut me from. He benched me and said, "No, you missed training for 2 weeks. Everybody has been training, so you can't just come back and play as a freshman." So at that point, I said, "All right, well, track season is about to start, so I'm gonna go to the track." And I had done track my last year at JC. So my last year at JC, actually, I was playing basketball all the way through. I was a national basketball player. I did, you know, played on the Jamaica team. And when I was going away to school, the track coach was like, "Hey, you can really jump." Because in basketball, you do a lot of jumping, right? "Come and try high jump." Right. And I was like, this is my last year. Like, I've been around a long time. JC is a big track school, you know. I'm a basketball player. So I went, and I made all at champs. I came like third at champs, which was cool. Right. And then so I
third your first time?
Third my first time,
okay.
Yeah. But I did it for like a couple weeks. Okay. And then went champs and placed at champs, which medaling at champs is a big deal.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. So when I went away to school, and then the guy put me on the bench, track season was about to start. And so I went to the track coach and say,
"Hey, I can run.
I can jump." I didn't run. I was just a jumper, as a high jumper. Wow. And I just did track from there for the rest of the time. And then became an All-American my last 2 years, which is cool.
That is incredible.
Which means I went to nationals and placed in the top 8 at nationals twice.
That's incredible, but I'm still gonna bring you back to what you did in school.
I studied
a lot was going on.
I studied psychology and computer science. I was doing a double major, but I did drop my comp sci major.
Okay, but it seems
I dropped my comp sci major because, like, I took a break from school. This is why it's a meandering river, you know, because I took a break, had some personal stuff. I was like, I can't deal with school. I came back home, spent a semester here, then transferred
to a different
school because I was going to Beloit College in Wisconsin. Transferred, went to the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale, did some design courses, got tired of that, and then transferred back to Beloit.
Your parents are the most patient people in the whole entire
No, my mother had people praying like crazy at that. Like, I mean, but so I didn't want to. I was basically out of school for 2 semesters, and then I didn't want to. I would have had to stay an extra year. I wanted to finish within the 4 years. So I just dropped 1 major, and I was further ahead with the psych. So I ended up with a first degree in psychology.
So you didn't even keep the computer science. You you switched completely to psychology.
I was doing both at the time, you know.
Right.
So I just dropped one because the thing, you remember with the courses you have like lock steps, and so you have like requirements and things that you have to have. And so at that point, like I didn't have enough comp sci courses under my belt to do the advanced comp sci courses. And I would have had to spend like 2 extra semesters to get there. So at that point I was like, well, 1 degree is better than 2, like 2 majors. 1 major better than 2 majors. So I just dropped the comp sci major because I wasn't about staying in school for next year.
So you graduated with a degree in
psychology. Which, you know what they say
what
about
do
degrees
they
in
say?
psychology?
What do they say?
The only thing you can do with a degree in psychology is go back to school.
Okay, but you did go back to school, but not immediately.
But not immediately. Yeah.
Not immediately. So what happened after coming back to Jamaica with your psychology degree?
Well, I came back to Jamaica and I was like, you know, the music thing was still, I had a rhythm I was working on at the time, and we had just put that out. But at that time, really, that was when the music business was like kind of crashing. It was when like Napster downloads and all that stuff came in. Music business was still very uncertain. So I was like, I don't trust music business right now as a money-making venture. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do website stuff. So I put out my applications for jobs. First place I went into, you know, they said, Djuvane, we like you, we love your work. Because I had work by then, you know. I had built up a little portfolio over the 4 years in school. And they were like, you know, we like you and we want to hire you and here's the offer. And when they made me the offer, I told you what I made on my first site. The offer was 1/3, less than 1/3. It was, well, I don't know what the exchange rate was at the time, but the offer was 40 grand a month at the time. I mean, this was 2004.
True.
So I don't know what that was like.
True.
But in my head, I did the math and said 40, I can probably make 100 off one website or 100 and, you know, something.
Moving from $1,500 on one job.
But you're in a different market now, right? So
true.
I can probably make a little bit more. If I sell one website every 3 months, I'd probably be better off. So that's what I tried to do. Sell a website every 3 months.
So how was that starting point for you? Were you able to sell a website in every 3 months?
I forgot to tell you this part. At that point, I was also running a business for my parents. So at that point, I came back home. My parents had kind of like, you know, hit a different, they have a kid who just graduated from college. So I was doing my website stuff and I was running their distribution business, their CD distribution business, as well as we opened a retail store in the plazas to distribute like CDs and like stuff like that. So that's what I did like immediately afterwards. So I had that, and then so I had a like office in the back where I do my website work, and then we had a store in the front.
So how do you're in a space where maybe, what was the space like in Jamaica? Were people hopping on to the whole website thing at that time?
I mean, you had like companies out there, there were like 2 companies that did like websites, and then they did websites for these big companies. So they were there, but like I started working really with some US companies at that time, and I got like a couple clients in the US, and I just started doing like a lot of work for them, doing all their design work and all their website work. And so that's really what I got started.
How did you meet these people, Djuvane?
The truth is, business is all about relationships, right? And I knew somebody who needed website work, and they were like, hey, here's a guy, and I'm like, hey, I'm that guy. And then eventually, like, you know, you do good work. Like, you know, another saying, you know this one, the reward for good work is? It's more work. More work. Yep. And so as I did good work for them, they gave me more work. So eventually it was like, all right, you know, it's too much work for me, so let's add a one designer. And I added a one designer, and then it just kind of go from there.
So it just grew from there. So you're freshly graduated, you're earning big bucks.
It wasn't big bucks at the time. I mean, I could have just paid my car payment. That's all. At that time, you know, like all life was about just paying your car payment. True. You know, you didn't get like a little Civic. I had a Civic, right? And life was just about like putting gas in the car.
Right.
You know, that's all I needed at the time.
At the time, but then life changed. Did it not?
Life changed when I got married.
There you go.
And it was like, no, you gotta get serious, right? Because no, you got a wife.
Right.
And my wife was actually in school when we got married, when she was doing her MBA. And there's 2 things I tell you when you're doing your MBA at Mono. 2 things not to do. Don't get married and don't get pregnant. And guess what? Both things happened, right?
So did that throw any pressure on you? Did you immediately now feel like, I need more, I need to start maybe looking for a job?
Looking for...
Crossed your mind? Never?
Not at the time.
Okay.
Because the truth is, like, at that point, it was like, all right, you've been ramping with this website thing. Now you have to take it serious. So I told my parents, guys, loved you, been working with you now for 2 years or 3 years or whatever, but I got to go focus on my own thing because I wasn't giving it my attention. So I went and I just worked on the web stuff, and I was just like a freelance web designer and developer.
You give me a very free spirit kind of vibe, and I feel like sometimes what happens with entrepreneurship is we view it as everything has to be super structured, super planned. You have to have your 10-year plan followed by, you know, your long term and your medium term and your immediate. You don't strike me as as abiding by that at all.
Yeah. So I mean, so that's a blessing and a curse, right? And so for many years, like I followed that approach where I would just do whatever I felt like doing, and it don't work the best for business, right? And so actually, when I think I started growing as an entrepreneur was when I got around people who were more structured. So I ended up my wife ended up working in this company, and she was like managing the company, and they had like a very good board, right? And they had board with like people who were like top business people in Jamaica. And I got invited to these board meetings all the time. And so they allowed me to sit into the board meetings. And as I sat into the board meetings, I started to look and be like, oh, this is how like you run a business. Right. You know, this is how you run a company, because I come from an unstructured background. Free spirit. Right? So when I'm in this thing now and I'm seeing like businesses that are running with more structure. And then I read a book one time, which is this book by Scott Belsky, I think. He's the guy that started Behance. And it's a book called Making Ideas Happen, which is about like creatives controlling their creative tendencies, bringing structure to their lives so you actually get work done. Because ideas don't make work get done. And I would always be moving from one thing to the next without finishing it. And I think after reading that book, I just realized, all right, you have so much potential, but unless you actually get disciplined, put some structure in your life, start to just focus in on things, then you're never going to get anywhere. And so that was like a major shifting point as well, is when I started to realize that in order for me to actually be effective, I have to add more structure. And I have to hold myself more accountable.
What was that process like? I'm sure that once you had that thought or what have you, actually integrating that logic or putting your creative self that you have been running with for so long to the side a little bit. How was, you know, introducing that logic? Did you feel like you were losing something or giving up on something?
Well, I remember just feeling like how it happened was by force. It never happened by choice. So like I was working on a project for this same place where my wife was working. They hired us and they were like, I want you to build like a system. So this is my first venture into like apps now, like a web app, right? And I hired somebody to do it. And I remember going through the process, and one of the board members, who ended up being like a very good friend, a good family friend, held me accountable to like my timelines. And that was the first time in life that anybody ever held me accountable. And I remember just being like, oh, this is so hard, you know? But I remember just going through it and then getting to the end and realizing that somebody held me accountable, and we're at the end of a project and it's like done, and I've collected all my pay. Like, this is awesome. You know, this is what life would be like if you held yourself accountable. So after that, I started realizing putting structure in place is going to be a very good thing for me.
All right, so you put the structure in place, and obviously you've put all of the necessaries in place. You've had fun. You're still having fun. You are a youth pastor, Djuvane. How did we get there?
Got married. Moved to Mandeville, because them say Mandeville is for, you know that one I said?
The newlywed and the almost
dead. Right. Right. So we were newlywed, and so we went to Mandeville, and so we were working now at Morelands Camp, which is a Christian campsite. So every year I had council, and so I was at camp council, and then one day the pastor from the church that I was going to when I was in Kingston before, which was Swallowfield, came down to Morelands. He was like, hey Juve, like, what do you think about coming back to Kingston and serving in this capacity? And I was like, no thank you. Like, I love country life. I don't want to move back to Kingston. And he was like, pray about it. And I was like, no. So 2 weeks later he called me and said, have you prayed about it? And I said, no, I told you I was going to pray about it. I love Mandeville, I don't want to move. And he said, pray about it. So I said, Rach, this is my wife. I said, you know, let's pray about this. And we prayed about it. And in the morning, we woke up, opened our Bible, and in there, it turned to like a scripture. And the scripture said this: you've been on this mountaintop too long. Break camp and head to the plains. And it was like literally, right? Break camp. Like we were at a camp, right? And it was on top of a mountain. And it was like, you've been on this mountain too long. Break camp, head to the plains. And so a couple of days later, we told the board, hey guys, you know, we think like God is calling us back to Kingston. And that was the February, the week, or that was the January.
Yeah.
A week later, we found out we were having a next kid. And we moved to Kingston, 8 months pregnant.
Wow.
And we got to Kingston in the August, and our last kid was born in the September.
Wow. Kingston, you've done the youth pastoring. Today, you are at One Great Studio.
Yeah.
You have quite a large team. You've moved from being the basketball, the music production, the lone wolf. Would it be correct to call you the lone wolf? Now you're heading a major team. How do you move from this is fun to do, it's meeting all of my needs, all of my requirements? How do you get to the point where you're now building out a business rather than being essentially self-employed?
Yeah, it started with a partner. So One Great Studio started, I was solopreneuring, like a sole trader for many years, maybe 8, 9, 10 years. And then I did a project with a friend of mine. She was just graduating. She was actually probably still in school. She was in design school. And I did a design project with her, and the project came out better than it would have with just me. Like she had ideas and different things, and I was like, who guessed it? Like people bring things to your life, right? Like other people have things and add value, right? So I was like, you know, so we agreed. And then she came back home. She was working at a company, a corporate company for a while, and we agreed to start this thing together. And we started it, and she worked at the corporate company for the year, and then after that she came over, because I was already used to freelancing and to doing that. So she came back over. So then we started that, and we had a couple people, and we were like a 4-person team for maybe 4 years. There was me, Gino, and then we hired 2 other people at the time. And we were 4 people, and we stayed that way for many years. Maybe 3 or 4 years. And then after that, like, you know, one of our key team members got an opportunity to be an equity partner in our next company. And he was like, hey, Juve, you know, I'm leaving. And he used to do a lot of that. So even when I was youth pastoring, he was carrying a lot of the load. And so I was like, okay, I had to hire to replace him. And it took multiple people to replace him. So not by choice again, we were like 6. And it was like, all right, if you're going to be 6, might as well be 8. And we grew from 4 to 8 that year. And then from 8 to 14, and then 14 to 18, which is kind of where we're at right now.
From moving from just managing yourself and pretty much living the life that you want to live, now you have a team that depends on you. What's the biggest challenge that you feel that you faced with being in this new scenario? I
think one of the challenges is to just let things go and to trust people, right? I'm a perfectionist in a lot of ways. And so, like, I would like to micromanage and want things done a particular way. But so a challenge for me has been trusting like the team to do their work, and it's worked well as well. They're actually very, very good, and they do things better than me. Like, you know, even though I used to be designer, people bring things. They bring value, right? And it's important for us to recognize that. And a lot of people who are gifted, like, you know, and like, you know, you're talented or what, sometimes you think that you're it, and that you are like the end all, like you are what everything depends on. And the truth is, no. Like, people are out there, people are great, people bring stuff to the table, and they probably have even more value. Well, that's one side. Then there's another side.
What's the other side?
The other side is like the actual business environment, and like just like realizing that like we've been lucky. Like, I had my bank give me a loan my first year starting One Great Studio. That's ridiculous. Which doesn't happen normally. It doesn't. Like, that's not something that happens, you know. But it was a car loan, nonetheless. Okay. Right? But then we give a car loan because the car loan is security. You can get back the car, right? But a couple years later, I wanted to build a product, and I went to my bank again. We had great bankers at NCB in Mandeville, right? And I went to them again, and I was like, hey, I want to build a product. I want some working capital. And they were like, yes. Oh? Right? So maybe that's just favor. I don't know what it is, but we never really had like the issues that a lot of people complain about, I guess. And I'm not sure why, but we got good opportunities that way. But Jamaica is still like not my ideal business climate. Like, as you see, I'm in my t-shirt and jeans. I'm not a suit and tie guy. Like, we were trying to be remote from before COVID, and all those things are kind of bucking culture, you know? So that also, like, the traditional business culture is also something that was difficult for me to navigate as such a rebel, but still having to function in this environment.
So how do you feel you've managed to balance that? Obviously, your team is growing, your business is growing.
Yeah.
How do you handle that situation?
I think when you're good, I think work speak for itself, and people are starting to look beyond suit and tie and like the traditional things. Like people look on the quality of your work, and when they see that, then like, they will look past your clothing. And so for years I had like big puffy hair, you know, like big, like a big afro. Yeah, man, like a full big afro, you know, like like not very corporate looking, you know. And I don't think I'm that corporate looking now either, but I have to keep my hair trim and stuff. No. But that affects things, you know. But I think luckily we were able to get good jobs and prove ourselves, and then no, people don't really look on us that way. They don't really need you to be wearing a suit if you have a certain work behind you. And I think we've managed to build up a good portfolio that our work allows us to be ourselves in this market now.
Yeah, your work speaks for itself. So where do you see One Great Studio? You know what, not even One Great Studio specifically. You've obviously moved through different phases, different spaces in your life. What's next?
I don't know. I mean, right now it's just like I'm really focused on building One Great Studio right now. And a big part of it is just realizing that we are in a good space. This is a growth space. Like we're in design, we're in tech, we're in strategy, you know, marketing, like digital, and it's a growth space. And so we have a lot of opportunity to grow, not just in Jamaica, but outside of Jamaica. And so like we're really focused on doing that. But for One Great Studio, we're balancing our agency work with products. So we've been building products out, and we want to start diversifying our revenue too.
Here you're at this place, you're in a growth space, as you said. Do you feel like there is anything you'd have done differently on your journey?
I mean, sometimes I wonder if I wasn't meandering so much, and if I didn't change course so many times, like would I be further ahead right now? You know, would we be further ahead? And I think I wouldn't change that, right? But one thing I do know, like one thing I would have done is to be more focused and more intentional with our plans. So being intentional about your growing, I think is important, just like kind of picking your spots. Last year was my first year making a budget for the business, right? And because before that, you know, we were always like, all right, everything will, you know, but we made a budget, we put a board in place, we set targets, and we really went after it last year. And it was cool to see like some of our targets, like we passed them, you know, we shattered some of them, you know? And so just seeing like the result of like focused effort and just intentional effort and being disciplined and intentional and strategic in like how you operate. Like those are like the things that we were adding, and just being really, really disciplined and committed to it. And it's worked out pretty good. So that's cool.
Is there anything that you have learned up to this present moment that you wish you had known when you got started?
I think just we spoke about this already, which is just valuing people and just realizing how rich their contribution is, like, and just like really placing high worth on the people that you have around you. I think that's something that I've grown into, that had I taken that more seriously earlier, I think it would have been a big difference. So like right now, that's a big deal. Like I'm really thankful for my team, for the people that we have around us, and I think they bring a lot to the table, and just recognizing that earlier and allowing people space to operate, I think would have been cool. Like not manage, like saying do it this way, giving people, and the more, even when I get in a meeting, for example, I just start talking a little less because I have a very dominant personality, but starting to tone that back a little bit, ask questions, and then to see where it goes. And when people come up with their own thoughts and their own ideas, like that's ownership. And that people work much harder at things that they come up with than things that they're like instructed to do, right? So allowing the room for people to have their ideas and to develop their ideas, I think has been big. And that would have been cool to do it a little earlier as well.
All right. Any final thoughts that you want to share for anybody maybe thinking about getting started, maybe somebody along their journey and they're just like, yeah, I'm done, I can't.
Well, the one thing I would say is to like the person who would classify themselves as a procrastinator and a scatterbrain, because I was seriously a procrastinator and a scatterbrain. And last week I went around and I asked some folks, and I was like, would you classify me as a procrastinator and as like a scattered person, disorganized? And they're like, no way. And it's like I've realized that over the years I've grown as an individual to be more organized and structured and to be more disciplined, which is what we spoke about before. It's just recognizing that even though you're creative, even though you're an ideas person, even though like you have all this energy and you want to do all these things, like nothing gets done by thinking about it, right? it only get done by sitting down and getting it done, being disciplined, like blocking the time, saying I'm going to commit to this and doing it, right? And I think that's probably the big thing for me that I learned that I would say that I'd want to share is that if you are like somebody like me who is a creative, who like different things and all that stuff, like, you know, add structure and discipline, and those two things will help you to even be more creative as you go forward. And the next thing is just to gather people around you who are different from you. Typically, we gather people who are around us who are like us.
Like attracts like.
Right.
Yeah.
But the key is to have people who are different, who bring different perspectives. So like my business partner, we're like polar opposites. And not only that, so even in building out the team further, we've intentionally identified areas that like we're weak in and be like, we want to hire in that area. And so we've been hiring much more strategic now than we used to. And that has also made a world of a difference. So recognizing how important people are, and then to really gather people who are different as you build a business so that you have different inputs and different skill sets.
As a random aside though, people tend to complain about the quality of, your hiring opportunities in Jamaica. Do you feel like that is an issue for you?
I mean, in our space, it's kind of crazy, like it's getting super competitive. Like, and with this whole work from home stuff, you have a lot of Jamaicans working for US companies now, and we can't compete necessarily with the pay scale, right? So how I see it is this: build good company culture. At One Great Studio, we've been trying to do that, right? And building good company culture, like a place where people want to work, right? So I think that's very important. Having a place that people want to work will attract people, pay people well, like as well as you can. We're trying that, and we try to do different things. We try to do like incentives as well. And so we're trying to pay people well as much as we can, while still making sure that we can meet payroll and still make profit, because we're in business to make profit, right? So I think those things are important, like being people who people can trust. Like I think that's also really important. Like, I'm friends with a lot of people on the team, and I know them, and I know like stuff that's happening, and putting them first I think is important as well. So I always tell people like One Great Studio don't have to be a place where you stay, but it have to be a place where you grow, right? And if we focus our attention on our team and helping them grow, then we can't lose at the end of the day.
Wow, the kind of boss everybody wants, huh? But no, that is an extremely profound thought, because people tend to look. In fact, I'm surprised that you've put forward that the hiring, the situation that you have right now in terms of the people that you can attract, that it's so competitive, because a lot of people put forward that the quality isn't there, but it's obvious the quality is there.
So there's good people, right? But then also it's a very you have to train people as well. And so what we realized as well is no matter how much natural talent somebody has, there are going to always be areas where you have to train them. And that's something that recently we've been really focused on at One Great Studio, is really developing our team, identifying areas that we need them to grow, and not only what we need from them, like where do you want to grow? All right, let's get the courses that you need. And that's like a lot of what we're doing now is like developing people as well. So I always tell people when we hire somebody, we don't get immediate return. Like it's going to take 6 months for us to get the person in a place where they know what we're doing, where they can contribute like really to like what we're doing, right? So also just hiring with that, and when we hire with that in mind. If you want somebody who can come in and be like top producer like right away, then you have to shell out top dollars right away. True. If you're not shelling out top dollars, then you have to build and train, right? So I think it just boil down to what you're willing to spend and how you can go about that. And I think we've done both over the time. Is hire people who need training, and of course that costs a little less, but as they develop, then you bump them up as well.
So if there's anything that I personally will take away from our discussion with Djuvane in this episode of Start Stories, is that life and business and entrepreneurship is really not about the standards that are put forward in a textbook or online in an article, or what experts tell you to do. It's really about living a life where you inject the values that you want to have carried over into your business or your professional life. So ensure that you inject structure and discipline, value the people that you choose to work with, and of course, committing to start.